Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Lean in Higher Education Conference. Thank you for attending today's session, which is combining lean process improvement with Student HCD to create maximum impact. So this is going to be run as a learning session over the next 40 minutes. So my name is James, and I'm one of the co-hosts and moderators for the session, joined by Tom Coogan. As for some quick housekeeping issues, please stay on mute during the presentations. You're more than welcome to turn on your camera so that we can see everyone. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Please note that this presentation is being recorded. Now, please allow me to introduce the presenters of this session. It is our honor today to welcome Edwina, Mandy, and Kailee. So over to our presenters, so it is sure to be a wonderful session.
Thank you very much, James. Hi, everybody. As James said, my name is Edwina Grose. I am the Director of Student Administration at the University of Sydney, and I'll be presenting this session, combining lean process improvement with student human-centered design to create maximum impact with my partners, Kailee Fisher, the Senior Program Manager from Digital Design Partners, and Mandy Snashall, who's the Director and Lead Partner at Digital Design Partners. I would like to commence my session by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I live and work, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, as well as the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, who are the traditional owners of the lands on which my co-presenters are joining us from. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands on which you are joining us from, and to any First Nations people present. I acknowledge that this land was never ceded, and always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the main issue that we're going to be talking to you about today is about student fee payments. Student fee payments are probably one of the least sexy parts of the higher education experience. However, I'm sure you will all agree that they're extremely important. And in 2021, the University of Sydney found themselves in quite a difficult situation. We had multiple fee payment deadlines across multiple teaching periods with multiple consequences for not paying your fees. These included sanctions, they included cancellation of enrolment with potential reinstatement, cancellation of enrolment without potential reinstatement, not being able to see your results, not being able to re-enroll. It was confusing. For international students, all of our communications around debts were often ignored until we got to the point of potentially cancelling their visa. And for other students, when we did cancel their enrolment, some academic staff members with the very, very, very best of intentions let the students access the systems again. And so we found ourselves with a whole new set of problems. Our technical and digital workflows were not ideal, and essentially we found ourselves with a lot of outstanding payments, with too many cancellations, a disrupted and unpleasant student experience, and the staff in the fees office were doing a lot of manual work, and it was incredibly time consuming. So we decided that we had to do something about it. And we decided to tackle it holistically. So we were going to try and get a really big picture of what our issues were. We needed to find out what the pain points were, not only for the staff, but for the students and for the other staff members of the universities whose roles intersected with the fee payment process. We then wanted to do the things that we could do, the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins, get that sort of in place really quickly, and then use all of the intelligence that we gathered from Horizon 1 to move forward in a continuous improvement framework. Next slide, please. And how are we going to achieve this? Well, the first thing we needed to do was we needed to talk to people. We needed to talk to our students. We needed to talk to the staff within student administration services. We needed to talk to the people who are providing the learning and teaching, the DVC education and the faculties and the university schools, finance, international student compliance. We needed to gather all of the pain points, and then we needed to feed this into what the students were telling us they wanted to co-design a fee process that worked for everybody. and that would be Horizon 1. Then, as per my previous comments on the last slide, we needed to work out what we could do quickly. At a university the size of the University of Sydney, there are a lot of references made to turning the Titanic. Things move slowly. However, we didn't have time to turn the Titanic. We needed things which we were able to do quickly, and those things may be things which didn't involve a technological change or a change of policy, but which would actually have an impact. And then we could sort of use an iterative approach to keep moving on those into Horizon 3, where we could build on all of our previous work to make real positive change and to keep on improving that. Next slide, please. So what did we want to achieve? We decided we wanted to really prioritise the needs of students and make sure that even though we were asking them to do something essentially that they didn't want to do, it wouldn't be the best experience that they had at the University of Sydney, but it didn't have to be the worst either. So we wanted to streamline the due dates, and we wanted to make sure that that sort of aligned with our policy and procedures. We wanted to really empower the teams that were responsible for facilitating these processes to reduce the complexity, to think about, really challenging what they thought were their constraints, and to make sure that we were delivering the best possible service.
Hello? Yeah, hold on.
Hello? Are we all good?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. I'll keep going. So yeah, we wanted to reduce the complexity for our staff through the not only through processes and systems, but also through the way that we communicated with the students. And we also wanted to really have a look at how we use sanctions to drive student behaviour. Were we doing it the most effective way? Were we doing it in a way that was overly punitive? Was it just sort of cancelling for cancelling's sake and not actually driving the behaviour that we wanted? So next slide, please. In order to work out the best way to do these things, we had to look at what our drivers for decision making were. Obviously, we have the student experience front and centre. Student-centred approach embedded in our service delivery and aligned to our student experience policy, which was a very big piece in the university. We wanted to obviously reduce our costs, drive efficiency, improve service quality, and also improve the life of the staff members who are undertaking these processes, which could be very almost sort of like Elizabethan in the drudgery of just, over and over again, repetitive, unrewarding. And also we wanted to make sure that we brought the rest of the university with us, so that when we were dealing with students, students could see us as not just student administration, not just the fees office, but as the University of Sydney. We could all speak to the students in the same voice, and we were all saying the same thing. Again, for those of you from really large institutions, you'll know that that is not always an easy thing to accomplish. We needed to be able to measure what we were doing. So we needed to have service metrics, we needed to have sort of qualitative student experience inputs and staff. And also we needed to be able to make sure that we were driving down manual processes, driving down duplication and complexity, and of course, driving down costs. Next slide, please. So here we find ourselves with this massive problem. Whoa. When I say problem, I actually mean opportunity. We find ourselves with this massive opportunity. So what are we going to do about it? How should we approach it? How should we really sort of make sure that we really get this thing and get it right the first time? First and foremost, we have to lead with the student's first mindset. We are designing for the student goes first, everything is for the student, and we build things around them, processes, policy, technology, and the communication strategies around that. As I've said before, we really needed to make sure that we could deliver immediately, or as close to immediately as is humanly possible. And we needed to be able to quantify what we were doing and our successes. So we needed to make sure that we had all of our metrics in place, our baseline metrics, so that we could measure against them. And obviously, yes, we needed to ensure that the voices of our colleagues were heard, as well as the voices of our students. However, we started doing this towards the end of 2021, and we still needed the outcomes, even though we were coming out of a lockdown. We were going into the student exam period, and it's a very busy time for our staff in that they're marking, they're trying to sort of get their grants organised. There were a lot of competing priorities. So our response needed to be COVID compliant. And we did the whole process, which Mandy and Kai are about to tell you about. We did it remotely. And that seemed to be sort of like a really overwhelming challenge at first. But when we got into it, it worked incredibly well. We needed to be considerate. We needed to make sure that we were not overly taxing our students and we weren't overly taxing our staff. And this involved a lot of pre-work, making sure that when we did get the students in the room and the staff in the room, we knew exactly what, like we wanted to ask them. And sometimes we'd actually pre-briefed them so that they knew what we were going to ask them. But we also knew that we couldn't do this ourselves. So we needed our partners to help us. And that's where the wonderful people from Digital Design Partners came in to make this happen. And to tell you what did happen, I am going to hand over to Kai Fisher.
Thank you very much, Edwina. So I'm sure everyone in the room is already fully aware that human-centered design is a process that ensures the human perspective and emotion is included in all steps of the problem-solving process. So as Edwina mentioned, this project was conducted fully remotely. That was right from our discovery processes through to the rapid improvement event. And so this meant that all our interviews and workshops were done via a screen, which brought with it unique challenges. Challenges around making sure our human connection was present. And of course, this meant that it required extra attention on planning and preparation. So when we conducted our preparatory interviews, which was where we worked to understand the current environment and get the basic grounding in the issues, we worked really, really hard to build genuine rapport. So that was around personalising our interactions to each stakeholder to compensate for the lack of face-to-face engagement. So remembering things that we may have chatted about in previous interviews and asking them about that and closing the loop. Prior to the rapid improvement event, we also really worked hard to ensure that each participant was scaffolded on what to expect. So it just didn't feel like a bunch of faces on a screen, but that it became a truly participatory process where everyone felt comfortable and of course safe, speaking up in an online environment. Next slide. So a key tool in the human-centered design process is empathetic journey mapping. And this is a process that brings together elements to create a holistic map of the journey. And those elements are the timeline, the actions, touch points, emotions, thoughts, pain points, and gaps. So the first couple of those, this is all done in the context of personas. So a persona is a representative person that captures the end user of a system. And so for this particular project, some of our personas were on the student side of things, both domestic and international. We also had personas for domestic fees team members, as well as international fees team members. And then we also included the decision maker and advisor persona. So that was people like your deans and your support staff out in the university community. So in terms of timelines, that's set up as the backbone of the journey. So these phases are finite, which means that, for example, the domestic fees team had 3 general phases that they went through in this process, which was sending out reminders, doing the activities between the fee due date and the census date, and then the post-census date activities like debt collection. For our students, their phases ran across the pre-enrolment period, enrolling in the first semester, enrolling in the second semester. And then, of course, because most international students have their first semesters paid in advance, generally, if they're missing the fee due dates, that happens from second semester onwards, and then they're in a debt chase process. Next slide. So the remaining components of empathetic journey mapping, looking at actions, emotions, thoughts, pain points and gaps. So that's understanding as the person progresses through those phases, what are they doing? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? And then what are the things that they're going, geez, it'd be great if this could be better. At the same time, that's not to say there aren't things that are already very good. And it's also about capturing those good bits as well. So the next slide shows the end result of the empathetic journey mapping process. So we interview people and participants that match those personas to build this map. And so you'll see the grey columns are the phases in the timeline, so enrolling, debt chase. The blue actions are the activities that happen within those phases. For example, students, they enroll, then they need to pay, and then if they pay or they don't pay, the activities split out based on that. Exclamation marks are the pain points. Emotions, thoughts are then captured and attached to each of those activities. So you can see the red boxes are things that aren't great, yellow boxes are neutral thoughts, green boxes are positive thoughts. So they're the things that are done well. And then, of course, we've got the emoticons over the top that then capture their emotions while they're thinking those thoughts. Next slide. So during our conversations with the people who are at the end of the process, as you do with human-centered design, we did discover a number of things that came through. So students said they want the communications to be clearer. They want to know what's going to happen and when, and what the consequences are if they don't pay on time. There was very much feedback that they got too much information from the university, so they missed critical information and messages. Things that we also picked up, many students can pay, they just delay. And why wouldn't you if you can keep all that money in your account earning interest? Why wouldn't you delay for as long as possible, moving that out? There's a risk of too much hand holding. So students just tell us clearly upfront what we need to do and we'll do it. You know, don't send us perhaps as many reminders as they were getting. But in all of this, there's still a need of strong support for students that are genuinely having trouble paying their fees. For our fees staff, they recognise we don't make it easy for students. For them, there was a lot of manual labour that they found really challenging, caused by potentially unreliable systems that are further upstream that are then passing on data that they have to spend a lot of time rechecking. For the decision makers and advisors, they really struggled seeing students in genuine difficulty and then having trouble themselves navigating the system to try and get a quick response. So the uni is very strict on deadlines for fees assignments, but then the university takes a long time to process things for students, which doesn't seem fair. So that's sort of a very quick summary of that part of the process. And I'd love to hand over to Mandy to talk about the Rapid Improvement event.
Thanks, Kailee. So to give you an understanding about what we moved into after this preparatory and planning activity, it was effectively what we call a rapid improvement event. It's an intensive 3-day improvement event where we invite representatives from each of the different stakeholder cohorts to actually come into a room, a virtual room in this respect, to be able to ideate and innovate on the process that's in question. So really that preparatory work that Kai has talked about really was trying to focus on the underlying rapport building, understanding of the existing process, and also having those one-on-one interviews to understand what the lived experience is of the individuals who are actually consuming this service. What this intensive improvement event aimed to do was work through not only the current state, but also ideate on what improvements could be made while empathizing with the user in a human-centered design approach, and then look to build a future state design and report that back to the university ready for actioning and implementation of those improvements. So what I'll aim to do is actually take you through that process. The first day itself is really focused on understanding the current state of the process within the University of Sydney. So we've all seen situations in higher education institutions where there is one way of doing things in policy, and then there is a myriad of different ways that actually is operationalized in that environment. So this is about having all of those representatives in that environment able to provide their perspective on how that process is enacted within their environment, and really understanding, when you look at this, sort of burying down into more detail, if I then take that to the next slide, it's really about narrowing into what the process steps are, so the mechanics of the process, and then identifying the decision-making points and also any waste within the process. So those of us in the room that have an understanding of lean process improvement, this is basically Tim Woods or equivalent, the 8 wastes. And it's a really good opportunity for those within the environment to learn a little bit more about lean process improvement, but also look to apply that to a process that they live and breathe each day. Because we have the representatives from not only the staff base in all of the different areas of the university, but also the students, this is a great way to get a very holistic perspective of this process and ensure that we're capturing everybody's point of view. The second day, we really look to dig down deep into the human-centered design component of the works that have been done. So Kai was mentioning the human-centered design maps that have been produced through one-on-one interviews with staff and students. What we actually do in this situation is get the participants in that rapid improvement event to work through those maps, to really walk in the shoes of the customer. I know it's a dirty word sometimes, but really looking from a human's perspective about what their interaction is with this process. It's less about the mechanics of a process. We do A, then B, then C. This is really about people's lived experience, what emotions they go through, any trials and tribulations that they have, the friction that they feel within the process, and what the human response to that friction is. And not only identifying the periods of frustration and friction, but also identifying periods of joy where the process has really worked well and really sort of resonated with the people that it's delivering for, so that you can take that forward into the ideation process, which followed. So this is an opportunity for everybody in the room, including all stakeholders from staff and student base, to rapidly ideate on ways that this process could be improved. Every little bit of waste, every little bit of friction, what can we do to improve this process? And it is rapid. No idea is a bad idea. This gives us an opportunity to rapidly capture ideas for improvement and then consolidate those down into common themes or sort of categories or concepts that could be used to then better unpack and understand what the implication of those would be. So following the ideation event, that was actually consolidated down into concepts, which, given the people in the room, were then unpacked and understood from everybody's perspective, really understanding where a staff
I think we might have lost Mandy.
Uh-oh.
That's all right. I'll jump in if she's not back in a few seconds.
Conversations that were being made.
Mandy,
Okay.
we just lost you for about 30 seconds.
Oh, my apologies. It has just started hammering down rain here, so the internet is obviously having a bit of issue. To give you an understanding, all of those rapid ideas then consolidated down into categories or concepts, and those are then unpacked with the relevant people in the room, getting everybody's perspectives on how impactful those ideas would be to implement. And then following that, the level of control the people in the room have about implementing that change, which gives you an understanding of things that could be really rapidly implemented and really high impact. Those are your sort of low-hanging fruit, those quick wins that Edwina was talking about earlier, where we're able to implement those quickly and really get wins on the board. And then those things that might be a little bit more challenging, you know, changes to policy or legislation or changes to systems that might require a little bit more executive stakeholder buy-in, a little bit more resourcing, a little bit more planning. So that's put into the impact control matrix, it can then be used to program those horizons moving forward. The third day is really where all of these ideas are put into action. So this is where the co-creation begins of a future state. What is the best possible way that this process could be implemented at the University of Sydney? Because I can guarantee you that every different institution, the end result would be different because the environment is different. Having all of the relevant stakeholders in the room gave us an opportunity to be able to co-create and co-design in a human-centered way that future state. The benefit of that is that you see at the end of the day, a real shift in complexity between the current state and the future state, and ensuring that we make sure that we take into account the humans in the process. You can see that there's several improvements listed out here in that future state. Now, I said it was a 3-day rapid improvement event, but there was a little bonus at the end where there is an opportunity for the rapid improvement event participants themselves to actually report back on what they've created over the last 3 days to the executive of the university, to key stakeholders, and to change champions in the institution. And that was what was actually completed as part of that final 1-hour presentation on the 4th day. And I'll hand over to Edwina to talk more about what the outcomes of that was.
Hi, thanks. So what did we hear? What did we get from these rapid improvement events, and what have we done with it since then, and what are we still going to do? If you divide it into the 3 headings on the screen at the moment, communication, process, and technology, obviously we find ourselves, as per what Mandy was just saying, in a scenario where some things are easier to do than others. It was very clear to us that we were not communicating as effectively as we could have been with our students. And that was one of the first things that we've addressed. So that was implementing clear and concise and correct communication to our students. But what we also did was, instead of sort of like we had previously been, sending them a reminder to pay and then reminding them of their debt, but we front loaded it. We sent them reminders. Here comes the due date. Here comes the due date. Here comes the due date. Whoops, you missed it. So we flipped that around, and that's actually been incredibly effective. We did find that we had a higher rate of fee payment on the due date. In terms of process, we have changed the way that we have standardised and changed the way that we sanction and cancel students. We've ensured that we do the same set of actions to every student outside of, regardless of fee payment due date, of which there are still too many. And we have looked to simplify that cancellation process so it has the least impact on their study. So we're making sure that we don't disrupt their connectivity to the learning management system, for example, or stopping them from sitting their exams, but we still need to make sure that we can actually recoup that money. That's been impactful. We certainly had significantly less cancellations in semester 1 of this year than we did last year, so yay. And also with the technology, for those of you who have the joy of interacting with a student system, you'll know that sometimes getting in the roadmap for that student system can be fisticuffs. And so we are fighting hard, and we have a place, but anything which actually required significant system input has not been able to be done. And so that would be things like ensuring the data quality and the reporting. But also one of the things that we heard very clearly from the rapid improvement event was that students want payment plans. And we obviously can't do payment plans manually because we're working to too big a scale. And so that's something where not only would we be looking to have a system improvement, but also potentially we need to resource that through the gains that we make in these other areas, which we can do. So we're working towards that. And we're about to have a second set of workshops around the new fee due dates that we've designed, and seek input on that and move forward in that direction. So that's something we also heard. So what have we learned? Talking to people is a really, really good thing. Not only did we really loudly and clearly hear how the students are experiencing our actions and the way that we sort of interact with them, we also really broke down a lot of barriers between various silos within the University of Sydney. I think there were quite a few moments in that rapid improvement event when, like one part of the university would say to the other, oh, I had no idea. I had no idea that what I was doing was impacting like that on you. That's such valuable information. So we also found that, like even where areas of the university are very, very, very attached to the way that they do things, having that human-centered design, having that student lived experience of that process. And if that's a bad experience, what a really strong catalyst that is to drive staff to want to change. I think that, it's really heartwarming to have so many people who are so focused on the student experience. And so once they actually realize that what they're doing is damaging that, it really creates a fantastic atmosphere to sort of drive change. We really liked the remote interaction. It was really, we thought it was going to be difficult. It turned out to be a benefit because we could get international students, we could contact time-poor staff, people didn't have to sort of run around different parts of the university. It's a very large campus. But one of the things that we did learn was it's really never too early to plan. People are busy, staff are time-poor, students have so many conflicting commitments. And so we have all learned that when we're doing our next stage, which is happening right now, we've made sure that we get into those diaries very, very, very early. And again, the importance of managing expectation. It's just because it's identified as an improvement doesn't mean that we can necessarily do it now or potentially ever, but usually now. So this becomes sort of like, you know, we identify all of these ideas as really, really great ideas. And then it becomes about what we can do now and what we can do in the future. And so that's been something that we've been very careful about communicating with all of the stakeholders who are involved. And I think we might almost be at the end of our presentation. Yay. I think we have some time for questions. Is that right, James?
Yep. So if anyone has any questions, pop them into the chat and I'll read them out. So we have a question from Julie. How many years have you been using HCD at the University of Sydney? Your use seems very robust. They're new at it and they're wondering how long it took to mature the level of HCD you have and incorporate that.
We've been using HCD, like, I mean, we have a student experience program, which we've been going since our last strategic plan, which commenced in 2016, which really highlighted the importance of ensuring that we have student-centered policies and engagement. And the use of human-centered design is quite sort of integral to that. It's really lovely to hear that you think that it's robust. I think that we're learning quickly. Myself personally, like, I mean, this is sort of one of the probably one of the first few human-centered design approaches that I've taken on a process that I manage. Obviously, we do a lot of it around, you know, like transition and learning sort of experience, but around sort of like student administration processes, it's quite new. But I think that one thing that Mandy and Kai would tell you, that my staff who were participating in the rapid improvement event, they had no experience of it. And so it was very much a really bringing them on the journey. And I think that one thing that Mandy and Kai did so wonderfully was actually not just sort of like improving a process, but also imparting a skill. And so I think that, you know, you shouldn't worry about if you're not sort of particularly mature at it. Like once you dive into it, you just can't help but learn an enormous amount.
Yeah, awesome. So we also have a question from Mohammed. What was the most efficient communication tool, channel, and frequency you have used with the student, as most students are not utilizing email as an efficient one for them?
One of the things that we did, like obviously we bill students by email, so we are using email and we understand all of the various problems associated with email. As Kai said, the students are bombarded with emails. And so actually discerning which ones are important is, you know, you can do a degree in that yourself, you know. One of the things that we found was really, really useful was we created a whole bunch of knowledge articles and we put those into our student website. They are getting a lot of hits. They're still getting a lot of hits. And we also changed the way that we presented the information on our website. And that I think has been very overdue, but also really powerful in making sure that students can, you know, do a bit of self-service. We have sort of ambition to integrate sort of messaging onto the learning management system. We haven't actually got there yet, but we believe that was one of the things that the students told us in the interviews, that they would appreciate being told through the learning management system, because that's where they spend every single day. And so that's something that we're moving towards.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Tammy and Farmino just giving comments about, it's a very rich story. Thank you for sharing it, and great insights into how empathy mapping provides valuable insights into student sentiments. I also did have a question actually. When you mentioned like quantifying the fee process, what metrics did you guys use to do that?
Payments overdue at the due date, numbers of student cancellations, subsequent reinstatement of student after cancellations. Mandy, Kai, do you remember any others that we were using?
We did look at the communications amount as well.
Yes.
And how many comms were going out and when.
Can I ask a question? I had a very similar thing that I was working in with the cancellation process, and one of the solutions that we tried to test was bringing on the sanctions nice and early, and that seemed to have an impact. The thing that we didn't have the opportunity to do is bring in all the various stakeholders into the conversation. So we had, as our first run, we had quite a few queries around the sanction, because students worried about worried about the sanction, and we found that the sanction wording was a key thing that we had to build as part of the process. What did you use as wording for the sanction?
Well, I think that we applied what we call, I mean, you know, like I'm about to go into sort of like, you know, corporate speak, stage 1 sanctions were the only ones that we really used, and that too in the University of Sydney context, that's preventing you from seeing your results and preventing you from re-enrolling further. So there were no sort of like loss of access to university systems, and obviously, sorry, preventing you from graduating, obviously. So because we only went to stage 1 sanctions, we did sort of say, you know, like you won't be able to see your results when they come through, and that because we decided that we didn't necessarily want to, cancel the students. We just didn't want to cancel them. It's just so stressful and it's so difficult. And so we gave them until sort of, we let them sit their exams, even though they were sanctioned. We sanctioned them right after the due date, which is sort of just a bit before census. And then we put the sanction in place. We told them about the sanction. A sanction like that doesn't really begin to bite until after they've done their exams and they want to see their results. And so we found with the students who are in that sort of period where they haven't paid and they get about 2 months where they just don't even think about it. And then all of a sudden they do their exams, they want to see the results, and then they pay. And so we did get like a massive sort of lag. And that's something that we're going to address in this stage 2 process, which we're undertaking now. I'm not sort of like, I'm not a mad fan of making the sanctions worse. Cutting off their access to the learning management system, I think, would be the most effective thing. But I also don't want to disrupt their studies. So what we're looking at doing now is we're looking at late payment fees and a schedule of those, seeing if that sort of has an impact, if we can get that group that don't pay by the due date but do pay by the exams, the ones that, as Kai said, are just sitting there building up interest in their savings accounts.
Work with that too, because then you start to get an appeal process built into for students that miss that deadline, and then are appealing to say you build, it creates work too. So you have to, yeah,
you're one of my
thank you.
Awesome. Do you have any other last questions? Not seeming like it. So yeah, please join me in thanking Edwina, Mandy, and Kailee for their fantastic presentation. Yeah, it's a really interesting process, and you guys had fantastic insights. So thanks also to everyone who attended today, and I think this brings us to the end of this session.